Happy
What?
Cinco de Mayo, everybody.
Happy Cinco de
Cinco
Mayo.
Wow.
Happy Day of
Oh,
the
and
Dead.
it's
Yay.
National Teachers Day.
Yeah, well, tomorrow is one of my daughter's birthdays too.
Nice.
So we will see. But Cinco de Mayo, I'll remember to drink a cerveza.
Cinco
after
cervezas.
Yeah, class, maybe dos cervezas.
I'm
Oh, no,
I'm drinking one for you now.
Yeah, okay, excellent. So I wanted to just talk about a couple things. So I guess I should try and share the screen. Unless anybody has any questions, concerns, issues.
Yeah.
It was a warm day today. I did venture outside finally for the first time in weeks.
Uh-oh.
I hear something.
Went outside. It was nice and warm.
Yes, it was. So hopefully you can see. Looks like the California Plumbing Code, Chapter 10, Traps and Interceptors. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me see what else we got going here. Oh, there we go. So I just thought rather than just showing you the, if you, again, I downloaded this. It's too big to email, otherwise I'd email you all these things, but I will be sending you some bits and pieces out of these things. But this talks about the traps and interceptors. So when you see those references in the code check to chapter 10 on traps and interceptors for the UPC, the reason you see that is it is here. You will notice down toward the bottom, they have something called prohibited traps. Whoops, I went too far.
Prohibited traps.
Yeah, so there's a drum trap, S trap, and there's some, I think there may be one or two other configurations, but there are some prohibited traps. I don't see them, but I guess that's because they are prohibited. My experience is if they're prohibited, somebody somewhere is using one. So that's just typical. I talk a little bit about the trap seal, so which is the liquid seal in the trap, not less than 2 inches, up to 4 inches. And so that is just all the basic code. And then we get into the commercial. And so while the code check deals exclusively with residential, there are a lot of requirements that you need to look at if you're getting into or working with commercial types of construction. Slaughterhouses and packing establishments, horse meat. So I don't know if anybody here has eaten horse meat. I think my father used to feed it to me and tell me it was beef, but who knows? Minimum requirements for auto wash racks. So you may or may not be aware in California, all the water is recycled. It's cleaned. They can't discharge it directly to the sewer because of all the grease and oil in it. And then we get into, if you need to deal with grease interceptors, then grease interceptors are covered in 1014. And again, I'm not spending a lot of time on grease interceptors, but if you deal with restaurants, then you may get involved with putting in a grease interceptor. So we used to use great big ones, gravity interceptors. So not unusual to see 1,000-gallon or 1,500-gallon gravity grease interceptor. Jensen Precast makes a lot of the bigger boxes, or at least they seem to have a big share of the market. And that's about the same size as a typical house septic tank. So they're usually in that $1,000 to $1,500 range or 1,500 gallon range as a minimum. I have seen grease interceptors as large as, or at least health department asking for one up to 10,000 gallons on a big place. And there's a procedure for sizing those. But if you want something a little smaller, then besides the gravity, they have these, you know, I didn't somebody tell me you can't read that. That's a little big.
That looks good.
Yeah. So now any of this stuff that says OSHPD, that's the
Hospital.
Office of State Health Planning. And so that deals with some type of hospital or licensed medical facility. And there are a pretty big range of those. You know, it's a place like Kaiser Hospital, that's a full-blown hospital. And then you have all kinds of other treatment facilities with varying degrees of requirements from, you know, inpatient only treatment to, you know, outpatient types of treatment where you just go in, they do some minor procedure on you and then kick you out. So, but anytime in the code you see something like that in brackets, then what you have to find out is whether or not that particular state agency has control over the type of work that you do. And so you can see that this, again, in a hospital, 1014, and these are new, so these little railroad tracks or quotation marks or whatever you want to call them, but at the edge of the page, that indicates something new. It says that grease interceptors shall not be installed in food prep areas of the kitchens. And that's because from time to time you need to clean and maintain those grease interceptors. And that's a pretty messy, not particularly sanitary operation. And they don't want that to occur in a kitchen, particularly in a hospital where people are already usually or often have one or both feet on the banana peel and are actively sliding. So it doesn't take too much to push you over the edge. So there are some requirements where each fixture discharging into a grease interceptor is supposed to be individually trapped and vented in an approved manner. And I think the venting is in chapter 9, as I remember. Whoops, I went too far. I think this is where I was. Yeah. There's some requirements on food waste disposers and dishwashers. And I have seen some changes or some disputes between various health departments and grease maintenance places, the sewering agencies in some cities, where one will want you to install the dishwasher with an indirect waste, and others will want a direct connection to the system. You're just kind of stuck with whatever the policy is for the authority having jurisdiction. Now, the hydromechanical grease interceptors are usually quite a bit smaller, and so they have a flow control device, and they're supposed to be more efficient at removing grease. The main reason most people like them is they're quite a bit smaller than the gravity grease interceptors. If you put them out in the parking lot, usually they want the gravity interceptors outside the building in the parking lot. And then that means you need a traffic cover if you're going to have cars driving back and forth over them. And if you want to see one, where is one? Oh yeah, out behind Khan's Cave over in Kearney Mesa, if that's still open. When they switched over from the original Chinese restaurant to Khan's Cave, health department made them put in a 1,500 gallon gravity interceptor outside in the parking lot. And you can see it over there kind of in the corner outside the building.
Where's that?
That is at the corner of Ruffin and Claremont Mesa Boulevard.
Got it.
Uh,
Hans Cave.
Yeah, the food over there, if you like, it's kind of a, modern Asian cuisine, kind of the fusion, trendy, but pretty good. So I don't know if they're still open or not. I'll have to go take a look one of these days. Anyway, for sizing these things, there's a couple different ways. One of them is based on either a 1 minute or 2 minute drainage period for the fixtures. And so what you do is you typically take the size of the sink or the bowl or whatever it is that you need to connect to the grease interceptor. You find the volume, take 3/4 of that, because if it's completely full and you put something in it, it's going to overflow. So they figure it's 3/4 full. And then the volume in cubic inches divided by 231 gives you the gallons, and the time gives you the gallons per minute.
Where you read it? Where you see that? Where's that?
I don't know if I see it here, but if you ever get involved in sizing it, you can also go to Shire, which makes the hydromechanical, and they have a program called Grease Monkey. And if you go in there, it will walk you through, depending on the type of establishment and how much grease it's generating and how many meals they serve per day. And so they ask you a bunch of questions, and then you get a little report you can submit to the building department.
For sizing the grease interceptors?
Yeah, for sizing the interceptor. And if you want, they'll actually work with the building department. Typically, I just do the preliminary sizing, because you never know what the owners really want to do. What they really want to put in is nothing, because
Right.
that's cheap and expensive. And then the next step up from cheap is sort of cheap, which usually means small. They would rather not have to dig a big hole or take up a lot of space inside the building, because for an individual fixture, you may have a grease interceptor, a grease trap inside the building, but you have to maintain those. And so many of them, in order to get a permit, they want a copy of your maintenance agreement with whoever comes and hauls off the grease. So those are just little things. So they talked about the hydromechanical and using the flow rates, and then this 1014.3, they get into gravity, and the gravity interceptors tend to be quite a bit bigger. And for those, they just use the fixture units, the DFUs. So look at. So here we have in this table, whoops, seem to be going too fast. Let me get back to where I was. I'll try it more slowly. So here we're in 1014.2, which is hydromechanical. 1014.3 is gravity grease interceptors. And what I wanted to show you is the hydromechanical are usually based on the size, based on flow rate. They can handle so many gallons per minute, and they can be smaller because they're supposedly more efficient at removing grease. So here's that equation for sizing based on the size of the bowls. So Rick was asking me about that. So lower left-hand corner of 206, you see they take the length times the width times the depth of the fixture, so that's the volume, divided by 231 cubic inches per gallon, times the fill factor, which is 0.75. And if I make that a little bit bigger, you might be able to see the 0.75.
I can see it.
There you go. And then divided by the drain period. And so if you use a 1 minute drain period versus a 2 minute drain period, you're going to need twice the flow. So some people will automatically use 2 minutes, and sometimes the health department may say, well, we don't feel that's reasonable. We base everything on a 1 minute drain period for the fixture. So so if you got a 3 compartment sink, you would take the volume of all 3 compartments times the 0.75 and then that particular drainage period. So that's for the hydromechanical. But the gravity, I think, where they talk about here, and there's some things they tell you. They won't let you drain your toilet, your urinal, or other similar fixture. Says can't drain through the interceptor. And I don't know why you would want to. I certainly, if I was a maintenance person, would want to go pick up a load of grease and find out somebody had hooked up their toilet or urinal. Sounds a little disgusting, but yeah,
It's not. Just
can
ain't
be
right.
yeah. So
There goes my-
design. Yeah. So there's some design standards for it. Location. And many of them require a sampling port too. There's a separate box at the end of the interceptor where they can pull the lid off and check the quality of the water coming off to see if too much grease is coming out. But anyway, it's supposed to be located so that it can be maintained and inspected and that they can remove the grease. So they have IAPMO. And let me go to the next page. Oh, I just screwed something up. Let me go back to 150. And so, maybe, what happened? How'd they get back there again? Uh-oh.
I went all the way back to 2.
Well, we'll see if we can fix that. We went too far. Oh, I know why. Somehow I'm out of the
Plumbing code now.
plumbing code. So let me go over here to the plumbing code.
There you go.
There I am. We were in hydromechanical, so the gravity should be on the next page. So as you can see, this table 1014.3.6, which is the one in the lower left right now,
Yep.
is just based on drainage fixture units. So you have that table out of, I think, chapter 7 on the drainage fixture units. And you can see for 8 drainage fixture units, which would be, I don't know, not a lot, 3 or 4 fixtures at most, you need a 500 gallon is the minimum size. And so if you have, like I say, 35 drainage fixture units, so all the grease producing appliances, and the health department or the sewering agency is usually the one that makes that decision. So 35 drainage fixture units, you would need 1,000 gallons, and that's a pretty good size unit. So those are the two methods, and if you're looking for that, this is where you would look at it. And when you're done, and so they have an example here, which I guess we could look at on the right, upper right. So it says a restaurant with the following fixtures and equipment: 1 food prep sink, 3 floor drains, 1 in the food prep area, 1 in the grill area, 1 receiving the indirect waste from the ice machine, and a mop sink. So 3 floor drains, it says at 2 DFUs each, mop sink at 3 DFU, and with mop sinks, they're typically either 2-inch or 3-inch on there. So 3 inches, they're going to have a higher DFU count. Prep sink, 3 DFUs, and so they come up with 12. So they tell you they just go look at the table over here. So you're greater than 8, you're less than 21, you need a 750 gallon grease center. And that's why most people will go to, or they'll often go to a hydromechanical, because hydromechanical, you can probably get away with maybe 100 gallon or 250 gallon hydromechanical unit. And so it's smaller, takes a smaller footprint, less excavation, and generally just a little bit cheaper. So
Is there more that can go wrong with a hydromechanical as opposed to just a straight gravity?
well, I think what really goes wrong with it is people. You know, if you quit paying the people that service your interceptor, they're going to quit coming, and it's going to fill up with grease. And then once it fills up with grease, you either got stuff coming out of it on the ground, or you're starting to discharge a lot of grease to the sewer.
Well,
And what they're
how
really-
does the hydromechanical one work?
It's got a little flow control valve, and I'm not sure exactly how they work because that's not my particular area of expertise, but let me see if we can find something. Stop here.
Is it like a grease extractor?
No, it looks very similar. It's just a little bit smaller. And there's some issues with trying to remove grease. So normally I don't like having a dishwasher because the commercial dishwasher is a very high temp. You're using a lot of detergent and you put the grease into suspension, so it's hard to get the grease out. It doesn't want to coalesce and float.
Right.
It gets dispersed through the whole thing. So some places they say, no, you don't have to connect the grease trap. And other agencies will say, yeah, you need to have the dishwasher on there too. And you know, from a personal standpoint, I think that reduces the efficiency of grease removal. But that's a whole different story. So let me see if I can find something.
The water's too hot, the grease never solidifies. Yeah.
Okay, I'll try this. You getting bored?
Oh, no. No, never.
Is there something the matter with you?
Well, that's never been in question. Yes, many
Well,
things.
okay. So hopefully you should be looking at a picture of a hydromechanical grease interceptor. Yay, nay?
Yep.
Okay.
So it's just,
I can send a copy out. So this is from the city of Santa Ana. So this is right up the coast. And they talk about it. So they call them HGIs, which always confuses me.
hydromechanical grease interceptor. Okay.
And so the key, the real difference with the hydromechanical grease interceptors is this little flow control device. You can
Okay.
see we had the same basic type setup that we do with a gravity interceptor. The stuff comes in high. We've got some baffles that extend down into the water. The grease itself floats on top. You know, you're supposed to slow the flow down enough that the grease, which is lighter than water, will go to the top, and the sludge that's heavier than water should collect in a little tray. And so if you're going to clean these things out, you skim off the fat and you pump out the sludge. And then you have a low inlet because the water down here, theoretically, if you're maintaining it, should be clean. And then you have a high outlet. So, and a lot of times right here at the outlet, they have a little, what they call a sample box with a lid on it, and they can pull that lid off and check and see if your grease interceptor is doing what it should. So
basically, it's just a metering device that makes it different than the
right,
gravity. Okay.
it controls the flow into the interceptor and makes the grease removal more effective. Whereas
I got
if
you.
all of the fixtures are discharging into a gravity at once, you're going to get a much bigger flow coming in because there is no flow control. And if only one fixture is discharging into it at a particular time, then a gravity grease interceptor is just going to get that reduced flow. And so as you can see, though, that they're much bigger. If we, the two companies, if you have an interest in this that we've talked about a little bit, is Shire and Zurn. And so both of them have quite a bit of stuff. So let me see if I can find Shire. Can you see this? Welcome to Grease Monkey.
What was that?
Can you see this? Welcome to Grease Monkey.
No.
Okay.
We're still on the hydroelectric. Oh,
Doing. We'll go back to sharing. Oh yeah. Okay. Now.
oh yeah. Welcome to Grease Monkey.
Welcome to Grease Monkey. So this is Shire Products. They make these HGIs or hydromechanical units. And so you can see they're up there, but all you have to do is do a web search on Shire Grease Monkey, and this will come up pretty quickly. So it'll tell you they're, blah, blah, blah. And so this will take care of most of this stuff for you. I can't remember what let's see if it'll let me in there. Yeah. I can't remember what my password is, but we'll try something. Forgot who I was there for a minute. Come on. I guess I got clumsy fingers. So most of the interceptors either 3 or 4 inch pipe size. We can go in here. You can size them. There are bigger ones, there are smaller ones, but usually 3 or 4 is typical. So you would type in there. They ask you what describes your menu if you've got a restaurant. So again, is it a bar, barbecue? Because different types of operations are going to generate different amounts and different types of grease, gesundheit, whatever that's going on. So pizza restaurant, Mexican, Italian, blah, 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 blah. So we can pick one. Anybody have a favorite?
Chinese. Like
Pardon?
Christy. Chinese.
Chinese. Okay. We'll go Chinese. Come up with the number of meals served today. And so it's either by the number of seats in the facility or square footage in the facility because they use the Uniform Building Code. So we can just do something like this.
See.
Number of seats, and you can change this. So, and what we do is a lot of times we lie about how many people are in there. So we'll put 40. So we can keep our occupant load at 49 and keep it a B occupancy rather than letting it go up to an A2. But like I said, they give you 1,000 seats, would be a pretty big restaurant. Well, we'll just do 40. So then you continue.
Bam.
And for this, that was just a preliminary. If you go to the more pinpoint, it takes you through more detailed. You input the actual fixtures you're going to use. And I guess we could do something like that. GB75, that's a smaller one, 75 gallons per minute. Liquid capacity is 125 gallons, whereas you'd probably wind up with, remember the minimum gravity one is 500 gallons, and that would take up considerably more room. So
So the
anyway,
pump cycle, that's when they want you to clean it out every 90 days?
yeah, so, yeah, typically that's how often you would need to pump that thing out. The newer ones, they have a little computer built into them, and they'll actually they hook them up to a phone line or to Wi-Fi, and then they'll notify the pump company and say, hey, I'm almost full, it's time to come get me.
Wow.
Well, anyway.
Cool.
So we did the ballpark sizing, and then if you want, there's a method where you actually input all of your fixtures you're going to attach, what the volume of the bowls are, whether or not you want to use a one minute or 2 minute drain period, how many meals, whether or not you're washing dishes or you're using paper plates, and it'll give you a more specific sizing, and they'll go to the building department and actually provide you with the documentation you need for the building department. Now, Zurn is another company. So I don't know if you're seeing something that says Zurn, yes or no?
Yes.
They're in grease interceptor.
Okay, so then we're good. And so they have a bunch of stuff here. So this is grease and oil, or grease, oil, and sediment. So if you had a problem with sand or dirt, which we had in the materials lab, we had for each sink we had an individual sand interceptor, and those need to be maintained from time to time too, although lots of times they aren't. So again, they have some sizing information. Here's one of these little sampling units on the end of the interceptor, and they make all kinds of sizes, types, but they're pretty good if you're looking for information on grease interceptors too. So it appears my internet is a bit slow.
We noticed.
Well, thank you very much for that. And the reason it's slow is to build for dramatic effect.
Ah,
And anticipation builds and builds and builds. And then pretty soon you're cursing and, you feel alive. But
but you're very good at it.
yeah. So anyway, but if you're looking for these things, many of the companies, in addition to wanting to sell you a product, they're the ones that are the expert in their particular field. So if you have a general inquiry, you're dealing with chemical drainage, plating plant, for example, they've got all these nasty chemicals that needs to be treated on site before you can't discharge things like chromium 5 or 6 hexavalent chrome to the sewer, because it'll kill all the bugs down at the treatment plant. So those things have to be dealt with on site. But commercial fixtures, faucets, flush valves, drainage, carriers. The carrier, if you have a wall hung toilet, you need something in the wall that will actually keep the toilet on the wall rather than having somebody like me sit on it and have it fall out of the wall. So that's usually with a cast iron carrier. Hydrants, interceptors, linear trench drains, which in some facilities where you're hosing things down regularly, you may have a trench drain with a grate over it, and you just come in and wash the place down into the trench drain, and the trench drain is trapped and carries it off. PEX, which is the cross-linked polyethylene that we use for water piping, and then information on the codes. They'll also have backflow prevention, pressure reducing valves, water control. So if you get involved with these things, the companies are good sources of information in addition to the code. If you're having a problem with the building department, because sometimes the building department, the sewering agency, and the health department don't like each other in some jurisdictions. And so they may be using you as a shuttlecock in their political badminton. And so in order to get things sorted out, sometimes you go to the company and they may go, oh yeah, those guys are trouble, and this is how we handled the last problem and got it sorted out. But so Zurn and Shire, there are other companies, I'm sure. I don't own stock in either one of these, but I probably should, because they seem to have a big chunk of the market. And some of these are plastic, and some of these are epoxy coated metal. So there are different materials out there, different sizes. Some of them have, you can see this is very similar to a septic tank with the access holes at either end, and you may need access holes. So some of them are designed to go into the ground. in a parking area, some of them in a non-parking area. They have to be constructed a little bit differently, and so do the lids. So we can, I guess, get rid of that. So I think that's probably enough for chapter 10. I don't think there's too much more in there. No. Chapter 11 is where you get into storm drainage. So if you need to size the roof drainage, for example, you would go to chapter 11 of the plumbing code. And again, we don't cover that in the code check because that's more of a commercial or business problem than it is residential. And so there is a procedure for that and what the requirements are per the plumbing code. Generally speaking, you can't take roof drainage and put it in a public sewer because it interferes with their ability to treat the sewage down at the treatment plant. It dilutes or waters down the sewage, which makes it harder to treat. So the bugs at the treatment plant, they're a little bit like me. I like my whiskey straight. They like their sewage straight.
Like your poo straight.
And so this is where you get into, depending on the roof area, the rainfall rate. And so you can get that typically through NOAA or ASCE, but there are rain gauges all over San Diego County, for example. Depending on where you are, you will have slightly different maximum rainfall rates. And then you just go into the tables and size your rainwater piping. So,
Are you showing us chapter 11?
not yet. I
Okay.
should. Let me move it. So you should see something size of gutters,
Yes.
which is, and you'll see a table 1103. Let me go back a little bit. It's not a very long chapter. But storm drainage.
Got it.
And so it says this chapter shall govern the materials, design, and installation of stormwater drainage system. So these are the roof drains and overflow drains on a commercial building. In addition to meeting the requirements of the jurisdictions for stormwater, in terms of the actual plumbing, you need to follow this chapter. And we had not talked about these things. So if you have overflow piping, for example, it needs to be on a separate line from the main roof drains. What they don't want is they don't want a single pipe serving both, because if the pipe clogs, they're both going to back up. The whole idea is the backup drainage. Most commercial buildings have a parapet of some sort on them, and that acts as a swimming pool unless you have scuppers or openings in that parapet wall. Size of the scupper. And then if you're going to size the roof drains, the leaders, and the vertical rainwater piping, it is based on the rainfall or the gallons per minute, which come from another place, which is really based on the rainfall intensity and the size of the area the roof drain collects water from. And so it's not very complicated, but many people aren't aware that it is in the plumbing code. So it's just tables. And then you're out of it and you're in the fuel gas piping, which
Wow.
is chapter 12. I think it's chapter 14 in the Uniform Mechanical Code. I'm waiting for something to show up. So far, no luck. There we go. Fuel gas piping. And so we'll go back to the residential stuff, but we do have this table here. If you're trying to guess, on a preliminary basis, when you're sizing a gas system or doing preliminary sizing, if you don't know what the BTU per input rating, if they haven't selected the appliances yet, you can use this particular table, 1208.4.1. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Okay. I just want to make sure that, so,
the top part of it.
and again, you can see that all of this is for natural gas. This comes from NFPA 54, National Fire Protection Association Standard 54, which is where this chapter comes from. And so you can see that if you have a warm air furnace for a single family dwelling, and you don't know what size you should allow for, the suggestion is you use 100,000 BTUs per hour, which should take care of a pretty big house here in San Diego. Now, as you get into a different climate zone, if you're up in the Sierras where you need more heating, 100,000 is probably closer to what you're going to need. But this table is, God dang it. Let me go back. Somehow I got off track. Go through here. I touched the wrong button.
Oh, wow.
Fuel gas piping.
This is the gas pipe. So this is all, the beginning of each chapter is always the administrative issues. What? I don't know how I got back here again. Maybe I'm on an endless loop.
Siphon, drain.
We did this. We did all. There we go. So maybe I can stay on this.
Fuel gas piping.
Yeah. So, and you see that says the regulations, the applicability govern the installation of fuel gas piping in or in connection with the building structure or within the property lines of premises up to 5 pounds per square inch. So that's medium or high pressure. It says for natural gas and then 10 psi for undiluted propane. So that operates at a slightly higher pressure. And then if you have a fuel oil piping system, which is not common on the West Coast, but if you're some other part of the country, it might be, you're going to go to NFPA 31 instead of NFPA 54. And so we can scroll down. Let me just go to the next page here. I don't care about that right now. Here's the table we were looking at.
Oops.
Oh, I'm back to the other one. So I have no idea what it's doing at the moment, but that may be good.
I want you to see the bottom part of that table.
Probably. So we'll go right past that table then. because that's not what's important. Anyway, that's the table that gives you the approximate gas input for typical appliances. So if you don't know, you can use those numbers. Building department will typically accept it. If you do know what equipment you're going to be using, then you use the input rating for that equipment. That's required by code to be on the nameplate that's attached to the equipment. So the materials that are allowed are specified here. Requirements on pipe threads, if you're using them, pipe joints, we don't care about that right now. There's some venting requirements, particularly if you get above low pressure, then the appliances normally have to have a safety valve would be vented to the outside of the building, or you have to have one that's approved not to have that kind of a feature, which means it's been tested and has been deemed safe. We don't care about all that stuff, so you can read all of that. Prohibited devices. So there are some things that you're not supposed to do. Electrical bonding and grounding. So you can see this is all new. So this is all new language for the 2019 California Plumbing Code. Restraint. So that's something else that comes up in kitchens and other equipment. If you have equipment that's connected to a gas outlet and it's on casters or wheels where it might possibly move, you have to restrain it in case there's an earthquake, as they don't want that thing flying around and ripping the gas connection out and then filling the building with gas, possibly having a fire or an explosion. So they sell little kits. There's a couple companies that make kits to do that, or you have to have an engineer or some other professional design a system of restraint, but that will come up from time to time. Much of the equipment in a kitchen or in a facility, from time to time, you're going to have to move it in order to do maintenance on it, clean around it, and that's why they have them on wheels or casters. And then you push it back into place. But you don't want it flying around and there's an earthquake. Or if somebody trips and falls and pushes on it, you don't want that thing flying across the room. Let me see, there's something I wanted to check over here. Oh, okay. Well, we're almost there. And so you had a, whoops, God dang it. Anybody remember what page I was on?
Nope.
We'll try that out.
There it is, 265.
That wasn't it. We should be. Whoops. Let's try 27. We're almost done anyway. Okay. 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 Come on, quit bothering me. Well, we were beyond there, beyond there, beyond there.
Prohibited use.
So let me see if I can sneak this down.
Three-inch
There we go.
minimum, there it is.
There we go. So there is a right way and a wrong way. That's the right way. The gas supply comes down, makes a 90-degree turn, and you can see that that nipple needs to be 3-inch
inches.
minimum, and then you have a cap. So again, that comes from, if you look down below in the brackets, NFPA 54, figure 9.6.8. We didn't get as far as I thought we would, but I appreciate most of you for staying awake. We'll be wrapping this up because we're going to start with the gas because it's the same for the plumbing and mechanical codes, and then we'll get into the mechanical code. I will send you one or two things. Anybody have any questions on